Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolfuk again. Wolfuk the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolfuk to midfield. Miles Wolfuk with the pick, the heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Howe, one fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5, takes the shot. Pinballing off the Canes for the touchdown. Howe showing the toughness for 6. Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Goes to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll to the front. Oh, now he's going to throw it and score! Gracious May! Throws it to Payson in the end zone for the touchdown. They have thrown the play through the left hand. Was rolling out on the run and threw it left-handed. Nard fields it at the 26. Heading in with Barshot. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys, as always, coming at you on a Friday night. And we have to do this one because that's right, guys. The Tar Heels did make some changes to their coaching staff, finally. It took a while, but they made 2 changes earlier today. So we're going to talk about those 2 changes that they make. One that I think everybody anticipated and one that maybe wasn't nearly as anticipated. We'll talk to you about some of the names that could be in position to replace at least one of the coordinators that was fired today. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the transfers. Josh hasn't gotten a chance to weigh in on those just yet. And we do have some new ones since the last time that I was on here talking to you guys about that. So we'll go through the list of 16 guys that have transferred so far and tell you the most impactful ones and ultimately what we think Carolina should do in the transfer portal window. There is a lot of work for Carolina to do during that time. But as I mentioned, we'll start with the firings from earlier today. It was first announced by Inside Carolina earlier this morning, right after 8 o'clock, that Freddie Kitchens and Mike Priefer, the offensive coordinator and the special teams coordinator, respectively, for the Tar Heels, they have been relieved of their duties. And so Freddie Kitchens, of course, was there at Carolina for a few years now, but took over as the offensive coordinator last year, signed a 2-year deal, so Carolina will be having to pay a buyout when it comes to him. Same thing with Mike Priefer as well. But, you know, this was a move, especially when it came to Freddie Kitchens, that Carolina absolutely had to make. I mean, you look at the numbers last year or this past season that just wrapped up right here under Freddie Kitchens, 19.3 points per game, 288.8 yards of total offense per game, both of which ranked outside of the top 120 in the FBS this season. The 19.3 points a game ranked outside of the top 130. So just a horrible overall season for Carolina. Certainly not where I think many people were hoping that this offense would be, even with a guy that was as questionable as Freddie Kitchens. Team ranked 109th nationally in passing yards at 183.5, 124th in rushing yards at 105.3, and 95th in third down conversion percentage at just 36.9%. The bigger thing for him was not only was he a guy that struggled in all these areas, but was also a guy that never really adjusted to his starting quarterback. Even as the season went along, things started to get a little bit better. But I think a lot of that was just Gio finding his own footing. You never really saw an adjustment from Freddie Kitchens to make things easier on Gio Lopez. I think maybe, towards the end of the year, we started seeing a little bit more shotgun, and that was maybe a change that needed to be made earlier. But you never saw this team go up tempo. You never saw anything that really resembled a substantial quarterback run game for Gio Lopez, which was one of his strengths when he was at South Alabama. So definitely a move that had to be made. And I think one that, even look, it's tough. We're not going to say rejoice or anything like that because it is a man losing his job. But this certainly felt like a day that needed to happen at Carolina in order to move forward and be better under Bill Belichick.
Yeah. The question was really, if this move wasn't made, I think you would have questioned Belichick's commitment to building a winner, because it was obvious that this did not work. This was an experiment that did not work. I understood why he kept Freddie when he kept him, because there was some familiarity with the roster that he was inheriting. And we've seen Freddie at different points in time be a good play caller, but it was never for an extended period of time. Even when his time in the NFL, his offenses would be good for stretches, be bad for others. This offense never found its footing. And it was an offense that looked pretty much outdated with the way that offensive football was played, especially at the college level. Carolina, very, very little time in the shotgun. Hardly ever saw any up-tempo. Hardly any RPOs, and those are just kind of like the basic foundation points of how you see the offense played at the college game. So, surprised it took some time, because you got to think we're almost 2 weeks removed from the season-ending loss to NC State. We're over a week removed from National Signing Day, but with the two moves today, it just felt like this was the week that Bill Belichick was going to evaluate his coaching staff. You can do that when you're not going to a bowl game, which obviously Carolina is not. And now you've got, hopefully the rest of the month to find your next guy, because you need to have your coordinator in place before the transfer portal opens up in January. So, I don't want to say I commend Bill Belichick, but this was a necessary move that had to be made. And I'm glad to see that he was providing the leadership to make a change, because Carolina played good enough defensively for the most of the year to where if they would have had an average offense, they at least would have went to a bowl game. They don't achieve the things that we've talked about in the preseason, but they at least go 6-6, 7-5. Because you probably win that game against Virginia. You probably win that game, against Cal. Games where the offense just wasn't where you needed it to be with how well your defense played in those games. And with the schedule looking like the way it is next year, you got to go play TCU, overseas. You got to welcome Notre Dame to Chapel Hill, so on and so forth. Carolina's got to be better offensively if they want to take that step in year two under Belichick. And now the task and the goal is to find the right guy to lead Carolina's offense in 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this move, it didn't matter what the schedule looked like. It had to be made. I was never a huge fan of the hire to begin with. I had questions about it, especially after what we saw in the bowl game against UConn last year. There were questions as to whether that offense would really look that much different. And I mean, look, I asked a lot of the guys in preseason, when we were at ACC Media Days and everything like that, would things actually look different this year? And we were promised that it would. This would be an offense that would look much different than the bowl game. This would be an offense that would adjust to everything that the defense threw at it. But the thing was, what was shocking was Carolina never established an identity under Freddie Kitchens. There was never one thing that you looked at and said, this was what Carolina did well. You could say that running the football was what Carolina did well. They never did it. They never had a stretch where they were able to consistently run the football well. And so, and when you get to that point, it's really hard to sit there and say that this isn't on Freddie Kitchens with, some of the issues that he was having play calling wise. And then the biggest thing was the lack of trust in your quarterback. And I get it, man. Look, we're not going to act like Gio Lopez is the greatest quarterback known to man. But at the same time, at some point in the year, you've got to have some sort of trust in your quarterback to open it up a little bit. And I thought towards the end of the season, he was starting to get to that point, but it never felt like Freddie Kitchens really opened up the playbook. It never felt like he was willing to really take chances. And maybe he was. Maybe, it was just that the receivers were unable to create separation. But I don't feel like that was the case. I didn't remember a lot of moments where it looked like he was really trying to be aggressive about pushing the ball downfield and about finding those explosive plays. And so to me, when I look at it, I mean, I had plenty of experience with Freddie Kitchens beforehand. He was an offensive coordinator at the NFL level for the New York Giants. So I remember his time there when he was with the team. And we all remember his stint in Cleveland. There wasn't a lot of success. So to me, that hire never really made any sense. It was a hire that was made, as you said, because there was stability, with the group that was there. I guess you wanted to keep certain guys in place, and you felt like that was the way to do it. But also it felt like this was one where Belichick went with him because he was an NFL guy, and he wanted that mix of NFL and college coaches on the staff. He didn't necessarily go with the best guy. So hopefully that's what was learned from this experience is that, okay, you went out, you hired the guy that you wanted to sort of mix, with the NFL experience with the college experience. You thought that holding, together some of the guys that were on this roster from last year would really make sense. Although, to be honest with you, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you look at some of the guys that seem to be at times in the doghouse or, just weren't seen on the same level as some of the other guys that were on the roster, some of the guys that were Bill Belichick guys. I mean, there's no excuse for why Kobe Paysour wasn't playing early in the year. It doesn't make any sense. You saw how successful he was as the season went along. That was a guy that didn't get enough playing time. Davian Goss, who we'll talk about at length coming up here, another guy that didn't really get playing time. So what was the point of bringing him back and holding this roster together if you were looking at this group and saying, we needed to play my guys as opposed to Mac Brown's guys? If you weren't really that committed to holding on to Mac Brown's guys, then it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So when it comes to this, because I want to stay focused on the offensive coordinator here, some people, I was asked this question earlier today. Does this fix the problem for the Tar Heels, or is there more work to do? Do you believe that Freddie Kitchens was the biggest issue? And, really it leads me into the other question that I wrote down here is, who do you blame more for the failure on offense? Do you blame Freddie Kitchens, or do you blame Gio Lopez for what happened offensively? Because there were some people coming to the defense of Freddie Kitchens earlier today saying, what is he supposed to do when he doesn't necessarily have a starting quarterback that's good enough to run his offense? So when I throw that question at you, what's your answer to that?
Well, I think the first answer is it's to be determined. Who Carolina hires will go a long way in either seeing if the problem is solved or not. He deserves, I think, the majority of the blame. I would probably put it 75% Freddie Kitchens, 25% personnel. Like, part of this, too, is the fact that they misevaluated, I don't think, on the quarterback. I think you saw the final. You look at the Duke game. That was a Gio Lopez we thought we were going to get over 12 games. And I know Carolina lost that game, but if that version of Gio would have showed up from week one on, I think this team would have made a bowl game, because he made plays with his legs. He stood in the pocket and made throws, and gave Carolina a chance to beat a team that eventually would go on to win the ACC championship. The problem was that You never had a consistent offense. Like every week you were rotating who your running back was.
Yep.
You were rotating who your wide receivers were. There was never any continuity. And I think that was, primary to blame on the coaching staff. But I mentioned there's just some things that Carolina's offense just did not do that you see at the college level, at the group of 5 level, at the power conference level, so on and so forth. The amount of time they spent under center was astonishing. This is a different game. The NFL, you need to play under center. In the college game, you can play in the shotgun 98% of the time and go to a national championship game and win, or you can win at a high level. That was one thing. You could maybe give them credit for pre-snap motion. Some people are a big believer in that, but after the TCU game, you knew every time when Carolina motioned who they were motioning, what side they were motioning from one side of the field, what that play call was going to be. The offense became very predictable. The offensive line, I think they misevaluated on some of those guys as well. So you can blame Michael Lombardi, you can blame Bill Belichick for that, but he never coordinated the offense the way that you're used to seeing an offense be coordinated. So maybe I'm coming to the defense of Gio Lopez, and maybe that's because we need to be open to this guy maybe being our quarterback in 2026, depending on what this program is able to do in the transfer portal. But I do think the issues were more aligned with Freddie Kitchens than they were with Gio, because all those issues that we talked about when he got hired, they really came to the forefront in the first game of the season, and there was never any adaptation or ability to kind of, coach out some of their limitations. This was just who Carolina was, and that's what they were for 12 games, and it certainly wasn't good enough for them to come back for next year.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's more even in terms of the split of blame. I think it's probably more 60-40. I do think that there is a lot of stuff that you can put on Freddie Kitchens. I mean, the predictability of his offense was definitely one of the things. You mentioned the motion. That was certainly something that became predictable as the year went along. Also, I mean, it was the personnel packages that were being thrown out onto the field. I mean, you knew when Shamar Easter and Jalen McGill came into the game, you knew exactly what Carolina was going to do. It was going to be 5 wide receiver set. They were going to split everybody out, and there were certain plays that they would favor from there that teams were able to pick up on. We knew every single time early in the season when Jordan Owens was coming into the game, to run block. So, I mean, yeah, eventually they started running certain pass plays off of that, but it became so limited. You knew exactly what was coming. And I think that's a big part of the reason why he is gone, is that, yes, it was a predictable offense, but it was also one that you when you come in as a coordinator, you cannot come in and think that this is going to be the system that I'm going to run. I'm going to run whatever I want, and that I don't have to make adjustments to my personnel. They're going to make adjustments to me. When you bring that mindset, you're not going to succeed. You need to bring a mindset that I have my system, I have my identity, I have certain elements that I want in my offense. But at the same time, I'm adjusting to the personnel that I have. And it just never felt like that was the case. It never felt like there was an adjustment from Freddie Kitchens to the personnel grouping that he has. Now, with that being said, I think he was given a lemon at quarterback. I think that was one that Carolina panicked. I said this from the minute that they got Gio Lopez. I thought that was a move that was a panic move by the staff, because they looked at the group that they had and they didn't necessarily like the group. Now, I was someone that thought it was going to work. I was someone that bought into Gio Lopez and eventually said, oh no, I think this offense, especially if the system is built around him, is going to be successful. And ultimately, that's why I put it more on Freddie Kitchens than I put it on Gio Lopez. But I certainly think you got to look at Gio Lopez and you know that he is just not a Power 5 quarterback. He is not, or a Power 4 quarterback. He's not someone that's going to succeed at this level, because he timing, anticipation, something that's definitely off with him. And, he's not the most accurate quarterback, especially once you start getting into the intermediate and deep portions of the game. And we saw that throughout the year, that inaccuracy really cropped up. And so to me, I don't think there's any way possible that you can bring him back as your starting quarterback. Now, if you want to tell me that he's going to compete with whoever, and if he finds a way to improve that much and eventually beats that person out, then that's fine. If you go into the season, or if you go into spring practice even, and the thought is that we're running it back with Gio Lopez and that's what we're going to do, then you might as well light this season on fire just like you did this past year, because there is absolutely no chance that that is a recipe for success. I don't see how he's a guy that's going to thrive the way that he's playing right now at this level. And look, I thought he played better towards the end, but you also just lost a game at the end of the season to NC State where your offense looked pretty bad again. Like, it wasn't great. It's still not great. And I do think that he's part of the reason to blame for that. So, yeah, I think that's got to be one of the main priorities in the transfer portal. If not the main priority, is to go out and get a quarterback that actually fits whoever your play caller is going to be. But we'll see. Really quick on Mike Priefer, then we'll talk about some of the offensive coordinator candidates. What did you think about this move? Because we discussed it a little bit this morning, but to me, it just I'm not going to say I'm shocked by it. I'm not stunned, but I was a little taken aback when I saw it, and it kind of did leave me scratching my head a little bit, because I didn't think special teams was great by any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, I didn't think that was one of the biggest issues that you had with this Carolina team.
Yeah, it kind of caught me off guard as well, because I wasn't expecting that. There was not even really rumors or scuttlebutt that this was a move that was on the horizon. Like, the Freddie Kitchens move, we've been anticipating. We were just kind of waiting for it to drop, and of course it drops today. I thought Carolina special teams was fine. Were they world beaters? No. But were they as bad as they were at times under Mac Brown? No. Like, it kind of felt like, to me, when Carolina won, their special teams helped them win. When Carolina lost, their special teams were maybe indifferent. Whereas, like with Mac, we'd go back and point out, three games a year where, a missed kick, poor coverage, whatever it was on special teams, impacted the game. Impacted the reason why Carolina would lose games that maybe they shouldn't have lost. I never got that sense this year with Carolina's special teams. But, I mean, maybe this was a move that Belichick had to make because he did not like maybe the commitment from him. Maybe this was something where the guy wasn't comfortable at the collegiate level, wanted to go back pro. I don't know. But, I mean, this is one thing you can say about Carolina head coaches post Larry Fedora. They've had no problem firing the special teams guy. Yeah. Mac Brown went through, I think, 3 of them through 5 years. Mm-hmm. Belichick is going to be on 2 special teams coaches in 2 years. So I don't know if he feels like maybe he can upgrade that position, bring in someone else that he's more familiar with. I don't know. But that wasn't a move that if Carolina didn't make, I was going to be sitting here saying, well, they clearly missed the mark. How'd you bring back this guy? I thought Carolina special teams was good enough for Mike Priefer to retain his job for at least one more season.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, I'm not heartbroken that he's gone. Like, it's not one of those scenarios where it's like, man, that's a big loss for Carolina. But at the same time, I'm with you. I wasn't pounding the table and saying this dude needed to be gone. I actually thought that the unit was rather solid, albeit unimpressive. That's what I wrote in the article when I put it up earlier today. Reese Verhoff, pretty successful. hit all 20 of his extra points, nailed 19 of 23 field goals. You know, man, I mean, you look at it, really, he was 19 of 21 because 2 of them got blocked in the game against Wake Forest. Now, you can put some of that on him, but if you take those blocks away, that's a pretty good number, a pretty good percentage from him as your field goal kicker. He earned all ACC honorable mention, which I think you probably could have even argued that he probably should have gotten even higher honors for that. The punting, you know, middle of the road, you know, Tom McGinnis career year, that's certainly something, but still middle of the road. It was 71st nationally. The return units didn't really make any major mistakes, but certainly weren't able to, you know, rip off any huge returns. It wasn't one that was as explosive as it's been in years past. 104th in kick return average, 77th in punt return average. And then, you know, the coverage units didn't give up a touchdown all year. Wouldn't say they were great, but both of them middle of the country in terms of where they ranked. I think it was like 78th and 81st or something like that. So, I mean, again, literally a middle of the road, mediocre type of special teams unit. I wonder if this is more of a mutual parting of ways, but they phrase it as he moves on from him, or fires him. You really do wonder if that's ultimately what it is, because Mike Priefer was a guy that had always been at the NFL level, or at least for, you know, the majority of his career had been at the NFL level. And you just wonder if it just didn't work out necessarily for him. I didn't think it was that bad on Carolina's side. The one thing that I would take a little bit of issue with him for this season was I didn't really understand why you had a guy like Will Shipley. Oh, man, I wish. Will Hardy returning punts and at one time kicks during the season. You know, there were also a few times, you know, kick return wise, you had Jalen McGill that was back there. Not necessarily saying that Jalen McGill could not be a kick returner, but you have a guy that's as dynamic as Chris Culliver is on your roster. This is a guy that returned 2 kicks for touchdowns a year ago, including one in the game against Connecticut in the bowl game. I mean, yeah, this guy, pretty good. Probably someone that you should want to use. Got someone that could be a weapon at that position, and they didn't necessarily use him. So that was a little head scratching. Maybe that was the reason that Belichick ended up pulling the trigger on him. But I mean, yeah, we'll see. I will say we are not going through our special teams guys. I have no idea where to start with that. Offensive coordinator, there are some names that I think are much easier to talk about. And so we will just focus there. Special teams, we'll just wait and see who Carolina ends up hiring. All right, let's look at some of those names that are out there. And we'll start with Chip Kelly. This one, I mean, I didn't even write anything down for Chip Kelly because I don't need to write anything down for Chip Kelly. His resume is really
written the name down.
He's such a big name that everybody knows him. Like, this is a guy that, you know, even though he's coming off of what wasn't necessarily the most successful tenure in Las Vegas with the Raiders, if you want to put it lightly, you know, it was pretty bad this year with him as the offensive coordinator for the Raiders. But I mean, again, I think one of the things that you have to question is how much of that is on him, how much of that is on a group that's really has no talent. I mean, outside of your quarterback who you signed in the offseason, there is not much to write home about this Raiders offensive unit. I know Ashton Genty was a guy that they drafted. I know that's somebody that a lot of people were really high on. Big part of the reason why he struggled this year is because the offensive line is just putrid. And the quarterback play has been horrendous. I mean, that is one thing that I don't think any of us expected was Geno Smith to drop off the way that he did this year. And so I get it. If there are people that are saying, well, maybe that makes you hesitate a little bit, I get it. But the year before that, he was the offensive coordinator and the quarterback's coach for Ohio State as they won a national championship. You go back to his offenses at UCLA and you look at the issues at UCLA and ultimately what led to him leaving. It wasn't that he had an offense that wasn't necessarily that successful. The offenses were really successful. It was more the defensive struggles. And he ended up, leaving that job himself. He wasn't fired from that job. I think that's one thing that people need to understand is that he was the guy there and they were still on board with him being the head coach. He chose to leave and decided to go and be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. One of those things that kind of has us questioning whether or not he's just kind of done with the NIL stuff. He doesn't want to necessarily have to deal with a ton of that and really just wants to be the offensive coordinator that's there to call plays and just focus on that. And I think that's ultimately what Carolina needs. That's basically what Freddie Kitchens was. Freddie Kitchens was not a guy that was going out and necessarily recruiting a ton. He would, of course, go out, and Chip will still have to do that. But I think if he's willing to come back to college, which it seems like he might be, because there has been some talks between him and Georgia Tech, well, then Carolina should certainly be interested because his track record speaks for itself. It's as good as anybody's out there that you'll see on this list.
Yeah, I don't see a scenario where he comes to Carolina. I don't. We got to figure out what Bill Belichick wants this offense to be before we bring in a guy that wants to run an up-tempo, wide zone run scheme, and that's what his offense is. And his offense has kind of proven he's a coach that has to have talent. He's a coach that's got to have legitimate skill for his offense to really function. When he doesn't, his offenses have been duds. I would argue right now, Carolina's offense is not in a position where it'd be better because he's a better play caller than Freddie Kitchens, but I don't think it's in a position to where it would elevate Carolina to where maybe you want to be in year two. So I know people are enamored by him. I don't know how him and Bill Belichick would get along. I know that they were friendly because they did some joint practices together when they were both in the NFL. But this is not a name that is even – you have to check in because of his name. I don't even think it's a realistic option. He ends up as Carolina's offensive coordinator. I really don't. So I know what the track record is, but look at the talent that he had at Oregon. Look at the talent that he had at Ohio State. Even the talent that he was able to accumulate at UCLA when they were good, and they were hit or miss. Their talent level exceeds where Carolina is at right now. And so I just don't know if he was to come and be Carolina's play caller, unless Carolina makes some big splashes in the portal, if it would be a really good fit for where this roster is at right now.
I mean, I don't think there's a better fit, to be honest with you. I think some of the other names on this list, frankly, are terrible. So if this is one of the guys that they're going after, then I think this should be one of the top guys. To me, you look at what he was able to do when he first got to UCLA, the talent was not there. There was really no talent on that roster at all. And he was able to get them to a point where they were incredibly successful offensively under Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I think Carolina can find a quarterback that's better than him because DTR was never one of my favorite personal quarterbacks out there. I think he certainly is a guy that needs to be talked to. Whether or not he would take the job is a whole nother question. But to me, he is more than perfect for the college level. Anywhere that he's gone, he's been incredibly successful offensively. It's has not waned throughout the years, and you could say that Ohio State he was gifted a great situation, and that's the only reason that he was successful. It doesn't matter. He won a national championship. He was a guy that coached that team to a national championship. Before that, they had plenty of talent and weren't able to get there because Ryan Day was standing in the way. So, I mean, look, I'm not saying you take away all credit from Ryan Day, But there's a reason that offense was as successful as it was. There's a reason why Will Howard was able to go to another level in that system for Ohio State. My thing would be, I guess it's just not realistic. It's just that he wouldn't even consider Carolina. To me, I think that's kind of crazy to even think that, because here's the thing. Look at how much Carolina was willing to pay Bill Belichick. Look at how much money they were willing to pay Michael Lombardi. If you can pay Michael Lombardi that amount of money, then you should be able to pay Chip Kelly what he wants to be your offensive coordinator. So if they're serious about football, then this is a guy that you should be talking to. If Georgia Tech can hire him, so can you. So I would say that would be the guy that Carolina should look at the most, because some of the other names, like I said, there are some names on this list that I think are just downright horrible. Brian Dable's one of them that I don't really like. And part of that is because it's not that I think he's a bad offensive mind. He's a guy that had plenty of success in Buffalo with Josh Allen. He's a guy that had success in his lone year when he was at the college level with Alabama. And, he worked on Nick Saban's staff. And maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe him under Belichick, he would act a little bit different. But we've seen the type of person that he is. He is a hothead on the sidelines. He's very vocal. And the thing that scares me the most is him working with a young quarterback. Because if he doesn't get the quarterback that he necessarily wants, then he is not going to handle that well. He did not pick Daniel Jones in New York. He comes in, he takes the job. He absolutely hates Daniel Jones. And it was very obvious by the way that he acted on the sidelines. He acted, frankly, like a child, and would basically just lose his mind for whatever reason. I mean, look, there were moments where he definitely deserved to lose his mind and get angry at Daniel Jones. But, I mean, you're talking about a guy that literally, because of how he felt about him, decided to play him at scout team corner and safety in a practice after he was put on the bench. So I don't necessarily know how that dynamic works at the college level. I know he's a guy that has some experience with Belichick, and that certainly is something that could come into play here. But I would not love Brian Dable as the offensive coordinator. Wouldn't be the worst hire that they could make, as we'll go through some of the other guys on this list, but certainly not a guy that I'm here pounding the table for, despite his track record with a guy like Josh Allen.
Yeah, it's not one that I would love immediately. Like, if that's their top candidate, I would be disappointed probably in that, because I think they can do better. But he's proven that he can coach offense. You look at what he did at Bama. He deserves, I think, more credit than what he gets for getting Josh Allen to an MVP level type of quarterback. I know some people have kind of tried to take away credit from that. The bigger thing is just the way that he publicly just melted down in New York. But granted, that's New York. That's a tough media crowd to deal with. I would not be against having that energy, that fire, and that emotion on the sidelines while Belichick's over there looking at the iPad during commercial timeouts. Like, I think that's something that Carolina fans could appreciate. But you could definitely tell that he got overwhelmed by the moment, the pressure, while leading the Giants to a playoff berth. Hell, what a playoff game! And then it kind of all just went downhill from there. And I just don't know if this isn't like when if Belichick was established and could do what Saban was doing, where Saban was taking in these reclamation projects, I'd probably be more endorsing of that. But Belichick doesn't have that reputation at the college level. You don't go to the Belichick school of therapy. If they wanted to bring him in as an offensive analyst or something like that, he's a good offensive mind. I appreciate his ability to coach offensive football. I just don't know if you want to put him in that situation where it feels like his offense is so quarterback dependent. And depending on what Carolina is able to do, I don't know if there's any guy on the current roster that would fit what he wants to do and how would he handle that guy if they're not meeting his expectations. So, I think it's going to be interesting to see what his market looks like, because a lot of people see him going back to college. But there are other guys I think I'd be more open to being my play caller as opposed to Brian Daboll in 2026.
Yeah, I think, as you said, if you could make him an offensive assistant, I wouldn't hate it. But if you are going to make him your offensive coordinator, you need to have him pick the quarterback that he wants out of the portal. It's got to be his guy. It's got to be someone he loves. Because if it's not, and you're forcing someone on him, then he is not going to thrive in that situation. And you said about the energy. Here's the thing about his energy. Is it the right type of energy? Do you have a guy that is, because for him, is he going to have the respect of the locker room? I think in New York, he lost the respect of his locker room. And I think there were guys that really got to the point and said, look at this guy. Who does he think he is? Would he have that respect at the college level? Maybe he does. Maybe with college kids, that rings true. They like the energy that he brings. They like being yelled at the way that he does. But I don't know. I can't guarantee that. So that's why, to me, this is a little scarier than what some people would think, where there are some people that believe this is a grade A hire. This would be a tremendous choice by Bill Belichick. And the other thing we got to figure out, is he really willing to come coach at the college level, or does he believe that he should be in the NFL? If he believes that he should be in the NFL, then he's probably not going to take a single college job, even if he is offered them. So we'll see. I think that's one. I'm not completely out on it, but I would say it's not really that great. All right. Now we get to some guys that if these are the hires, I don't know what to think. Scott Turner, remember, he was the guy that we talked about last offseason. He's the Jets passing game coordinator. And let me tell you, the New York Jets passing game sucks. It is as bad as any passing game in the entirety of the NFL. Like, it does not get much worse than what we've seen him put out there this year. They're going to be starting their third quarterback of the season. That is certainly not a recipe for success. Brady Cook, I don't know if that's going to lead to any sort of change for that offense. And then you look at where he was previously. Interim offensive coordinator for the Raiders, wasn't good in that spot. Offensive coordinator for the Washington football team, eventually the Commanders, wasn't anything to write home about. This would be a pretty lackluster hire. And I'll also throw in Mick Lombardi, who, if this, I gotta tell you, man, if that's the hire, I think I'm completely out on Belichick. I get it. This is another guy that, has a track record in the NFL. So I'm not, that's the thing. I'm not trying to completely downplay him as just some guy that doesn't even remotely deserve to be talked about in this scenario. But this has to be way down the list. This has to be last possible choice for Carolina. Nobody else wants the job. They're saying this is the worst job that you could possibly take in all of sports. Then you could turn to Michael Lombardi's son and go with that. If you're turning to one of his sons, you might as well just turn to the one that's on the staff already. But I guess this one you turn to because there's more experience. He's the current quarterbacks coach for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, remember, that's a spot that he just took this year. So I don't know how much credit you're giving him. You're not giving him any credit for Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy was already an established product before he got there. Maybe you give him some credit for what he was able to do with Mac Jones. I don't know. His time as the offensive coordinator for the Raiders wasn't really great. The first year wasn't horrible, but that was a lot of guys that were held over from the previous regime that were there. And then 2023, it was just a complete disaster. Now, he wasn't given a great starting quarterback. Aiden O'Connell was a starting quarterback for that one. That's not necessarily the guy that you would prefer to have at the NFL level to be able to succeed. But the reason why this one is realistic is because not only was he, is he the son of Mike Lombardi, he was on the Patriots staff back in 2011. Where he was a scouting assistant, spent 2011, 2012 on the staff before eventually leaving for other stints in San Francisco, and then eventually comes back to the Patriots staff as the assistant quarterbacks coach in 2019, and then is the New England Patriots wide receiver coach in 2020 and 2021. I got to tell you, neither one of these are doing it for me. And if either one of these guys are the hire, I feel incredibly disappointed. And it's why it's probably the most realistic options.
Well, one, I wouldn't hold Scott Turner's time with the Jets against him. I don't know how many I don't know how many coaches would thrive with the quarterback position that he's been stuck with. I think what makes these guys probably interesting and intriguing is their offensive background. I think probably fits what Bill Belichick wants his offense to be while he's the head coach of Carolina. Like, if they're wanting to run more pro style offense, which is a decision that, again, we gotta find out what Carolina wants to be offensively. Did Belichick see the way the college game, and is he going to open up and adapt and want to be up tempo, no huddle, want to spread the ball around, or does he want to play the way that I think he wanted to play under Freddie Kitchens? Both these guys have backgrounds that I think fit closer in line to that line of thinking. You look at Scott Turner being the son of Norv Turner. I mean, at every point in turn, man, the Turners have put out good offenses at the NFL level, competitive offenses at the NFL level. You look at Lombardi, his time with the 49ers, you mentioned, of course, having coached with New England. But, I mean, that's a guy that's coached under Kyle Shanahan, as innovative a play caller as there is in the National Football League. They do, if you went that route, I think you could expect to see Carolina be a lot more diverse. That's an offense that they throw a lot of different personnel groups at you. They're physical at the point of attack. They're physical in the run game, something that I think could benefit Carolina, because you've got a back into, Damon June. That I think could be if that's the kind of offense Carolina's wanting to run, could maybe fit better than what you saw during Freddie Kitchens. So these names, on the surface, they're not sexy, but their backgrounds, I think, are intriguing. Again, assuming that's the line of thinking that Carolina is still not willing to adapt offensively. I just find that hard to believe. I mean, I think with what Bill Belichick was exposed to, with the way he saw, TCU run up and down the field, even a Clemson offense that was, borderline pedestrian. You saw how aggressive maybe Duke was, with 7 4th down attempts. Pretty much once they crossed the 50-yard line, they were going for it. If they really did learn a lot about the college game, and that's, Michael Lombardi said that at their signing day press conference, they really learned a lot. I think they learned a lot about the way the the side of the ball is played, and it's night and day different from what Belichick coached at the NFL level. So I don't think these would be the direction that they'd go in, but their backgrounds, I think, could interest and intrigue Bill Belichick, at least on the surface.
I think it's probably the direction that they end up going in. I think it's probably one of those two guys, and I got to tell you, I will be pretty angry because I think you could say that Lombardi may have learned stuff from Shanahan. He's been there 1 year. I don't know how much he really takes away from him. This is a guy that I think would be hired because he has the relationship with Michael, being his son, and because he has the relationship with Bill Belichick, having been on his staffs. I don't really know what that ultimately leads to. And I mean, you look at it, those offenses in 2019 and through 2021 weren't the greatest offenses that we've seen from New England. They were offenses that really struggled at times. And he was not necessarily the reason why they struggled, but pulling from that staff, I don't think is necessarily the ringing endorsement that it would be if you were pulling from staffs earlier. Scott Turner, I mean, yeah, I get it. You do have the history, of the family and the success that they've had, but I just don't know if this is a guy that's necessarily a offensive coordinator, a play caller at any level. I think he might be a guy that's just better off served as an assistant. Because, you look at it, his offenses are not exactly innovative. That's certainly something that I think you have to get in your next offensive coordinator, is someone that has a little bit more of an open mind. And that's hopefully what, as you said, hopefully what Bill Belichick and Mike Lombardi learned during this stretch, is that you need guys that might have different mindsets than you. You need to have them come in and throw something different at you in what is a game that you were not prepared for. College is much different than the NFL in terms of what is able to succeed. So hopefully they take that mindset going into this offensive coordinator hire. And hopefully, those are two names that show up on the list, but don't necessarily get looked at as the top candidates. There's other guys that they're at least trying for before they get to them. Now you get to a guy that another name that's been brought up, and I don't necessarily think it's the same as these other two. It's Ben McDaniels, who is the brother of Josh McDaniels. And I get it. That's, something that, again, another connection. Maybe that doesn't necessarily work for you guys. But when you look at it, this is a guy that's been the Texans' wide receiver and passing game coordinator since 2022. I think this would make a little bit more sense if they're going into the NFL ranks. This is a guy that, I think has been waiting for his opportunity to officially become a play caller. I think, the fact that he is a part of the passing game, success that we've seen from Houston is a big, big feather in his cap. And the other thing is that this is a guy that's been at the college level. Offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach for Rutgers in 2015. Quarterbacks coach for the Michigan Wolverines in 2019 and 2020. So he's been around the college game. I think this might be the perfect mix that you're looking for. Now, this would not be my hire. This would not be the guy that I would say you would go with out of the more realistic guys. But I do think this is certainly a much more attractive guy in terms of the fact that he's not nearly as connected to Bill Belichick and this staff, and the fact that he's got that college experience. So I would take a serious look here.
Yeah, I think you got to love the blend of time at the college game and then his time spent at the NFL, and what he's been a part of with Houston, CJ Stroud, just being a part of that winning culture that the Texans have cultivated with him. And then you just look at some of the best years of New England was with the McDaniels on the coaching staff. Maybe Belichick needs the McDaniels on his staff in college to really, can complete things. I don't know, but this name I think is at least on the surface very intriguing because he's got the mix of experience at both levels, and probably the thing you like about it the most is, while he's the brother of someone that's very connected to Belichick, he individually is not connected to Belichick and might be willing to, challenge him and persuade him that there's a better way of doing things than the way that Belichick thinks of doing things. So I think what you worry about with this one, what plays into this is, looks like Houston's in that running to win the AFC South. They put themselves in a position to maybe be a wild card team for the AFC playoffs. what's his timeline here in terms of maybe getting him hired, getting him on staff when the portal opens. Like, I wouldn't see him because it would just be, I wouldn't see him leaving during the season to come be an offensive coordinator while he's in the middle of helping the Texans game plan for a playoff run. And if they get into the playoffs, they'd be hoping for it to be a Super Bowl run. But very intrigued by this name because, there's been some changes at the Texans offense. Bobby Slowick was a hot name a few years ago. And while they moved on from Slowick, they didn't move on from McDaniels, which tells you that there's something that, D'Amico Ryans maybe values because they didn't make wholesale changes. So, I think this is a name that probably today isn't sexy, but as we see this hiring process maybe move along and evaluate, could be a name that becomes more intriguing if we're still looking for a coordinator a week or two from now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say he's probably a second or third on my list. I have him that high. So I would really think that he is a guy that if you're wanting to seriously make a hire, then you would look at that. The one thing, as you mentioned, is the timeline. That's the most concerning part about it, is you would have to convince him to leave the Houston in the middle of this run and say, hey, man, we need you in here. We need you to start putting together the group of guys that you want out of the transfer portal, start formulating this offense, and really just going from there. And so I think that's a challenge that they would have to overcome. He's 45 years old. I think that's certainly something that, is more than okay with some of the ages of some of the other guys that they're considering here. But I think, that's certainly something that some people may look at and say, at that age, he's not necessarily as young as some of these other guys. Is he going to, connect with some of the younger guys on this roster and everything like that? I think he's still a guy that should be taken seriously. Now we get to the college names. We'll run through them here quickly. I think with this one, I know he's got a history with Michael Lombardi, worked for him when he was with the Raiders. Jay Norvell, look, he had plenty of success with his offense at Nevada when he had Carson Strong. That was certainly a guy that he was able to do some things with. But that did not translate when he got to Colorado State. And maybe you give him a pass. Maybe you say Colorado State is an incredibly difficult school to recruit at. It's just not a program that's necessarily had the greatest amount of offensive success over the years. But you would have liked to see him do a little bit of a better job there. Matt Wells, the offensive coordinator, former offensive coordinator now of Kansas State. He was not retained by new Kansas State head coach Colin Klein. That makes a lot of sense. Colin Klein, of course, the former offensive coordinator at Texas A&M. He's taken over as the head coach, so he's going to call his own plays. The offense this year averaged 29.4 points per game, 370.1 yards of total offense per game. So not great numbers. And really, when you look at it, you go back to his time as the head coach at Texas Tech. And I think that's the big one is his time as the head coach at Texas Tech. And then you follow his time, as you go throughout to his stint at Kansas State. The offenses haven't necessarily been great. So this is one that I get because he's a guy that's been around college football for a while now. He's going to have the understanding. He was a head coach, at Utah State and then at Texas Tech. Utah State, there was some success, but not necessarily at Texas Tech. I think this is one that I'm probably good on, but certainly is a name that's going to pop up because of all the experience that he has calling plays at this level. And then Corey Dennis, this is one of the youngest guys out there. Certainly a guy that I think Carolina should be looking at and taking a serious look at if they are, actually conducting this search and looking, for guys that are up and comers, only 33 years of age, a guy that at one time, he's not too far removed from his playing career at Georgia Tech. So he's been in this conference before, but this is a guy that came up through one of the best systems that you can come up through, Ohio State. He was, started there in 2015 as an intern, eventually ended there as Ohio State's quarterbacks coach from 2020 to 2023. Pretty successful stint. Was the pass game coordinator and quarterbacks coach for Tulsa, where in 2024, not the most successful stint there, but again, that was under a first-year head coach, and certainly was a group that was very, very under in terms of talent, definitely lacked a lot of talent there, but went to UNLV this year. I was a part of their staff and was very successful. Well, he was the offensive coordinator and the quarterbacks coach for a UNLV team that averaged 35.9 points per game and 459.1 yards of total offense. If you're looking for just strictly a college guy, you're looking for new ideas in the room, I think Corey Dennis probably is the guy that I would look at, probably the guy that has me the most excited of some of the younger guys on this list. And I would probably say that this would be one of those guys that Carolina should take a serious look at. What do you think about the guys that have experience at the college level?
Yeah, the thing about Wells and Norvell that you like the most is that they've got college head coaching experience. I think Belichick could really benefit from having that just on his staff with the way that you got to navigate some stuff. From whether it be, recruiting, they've been around with the transfer portal, setting a culture, so on and so forth. That could be almost as valuable as what they do from a play calling perspective. And, with Wells, you kept saying, okay, not great. If this team averages 29 points per game next year, they're going to win more games than they did this past year. If Carolina would have averaged 29 points per game this year, they would have won at least 6-7 games. And I know that wasn't the expectation once you hired Bill Belichick, but we're not asking them to be great. We're asking them to be good. And so I think you kind of got to change it, the messaging around that. So those are guys that I think you could be interested in from. They've got experience calling plays. They also got experience just leading a program, and it's different doing so in college as opposed to doing so in the pros. You couldn't go wrong with a Corey Dennis hire, just, where he came up during his time there in Columbus. He then goes to UNLV. They bring Dan Mullen in, and he's a part of an offensive staff that, that offense put up points and yards week in, week out. And all of his time has primarily been spent exclusively at the college level. So you would just trust his background where he's gone. And an Ohio State program that they're great defensively. They've been really solid on that side of the ball. But since Urban Meyer showed up, back in 2012, that's been an offensive-driven program. And then Dan Mullen's, MO was all about offense. From his time as the offensive coordinator in Florida to when he got the head coaching job at Mississippi State, what he did at Florida in his brief time there, and then what he was able to do at UNLV. I think they were 10-2 in the regular season before losing to Boise State, in the Mountain West title game. So I think that name would excite you because I think that would be evidence that Belichick, Lombardi, they're willing to adapt and that Carolina is going to play a much more modern style of offense. And I think with his time spent at Ohio State, he would know how to put together an offense that could still be explosive, dynamic, physical at the power conference level, and not just, him beating up on group of 5 schools. So I think that's going to be a name, to monitor. And if that's one that you see gets an interview or 2 interviews, could be a sign that maybe Belichick and Lombardi, they did learn their lesson and they understand they've got to play a different brand of offense if they want to be much more competitive in year 2 of what they're setting up to be is about a 3 to 4 year rebuild of the UNC program.
Yeah, I mean, not a bad point when it comes to Matt Wells. I think the one thing that I would say is that, yes, you do want to be okay as an offense. That's really the bar that you start at. but you would like to be better than that. You would like to be a pretty great offense at the college level. And there are guys, I mean, to me, like, I think Dennis is a guy that could get you there. He's such a young mind. He's going to bring new ideas to you. With Matt Wells, I mean, I think he's become a guy that at the college level, has almost become a little predictable. I mean, you go back to his offenses at Texas Tech, and they really weren't that great. And we've seen there have been a lot of really great offenses at Texas Tech. So when he was still a guy that ran an air raid system, I think that certainly is something that you would expect from them. I don't hold this year necessarily as much against him because remember, they didn't have a running game because their running back basically quit on the season. Dylan Edwards, their starting running back who transferred over from Colorado, didn't play really the whole year. He had injuries, but he basically just set out the entire season. So I don't know. He's a weird name because I get it. He's got the established roots in the sport. He had success when he was at Utah State, and maybe the success there as a head coach, maybe the same thing for Jay Norvell as the head coach at Nevada would lead you to believe they could help Bill Belichick. But I'd rather go with the younger guy out of the group. I think he certainly is a name that we should be keeping an eye on. All right. So those are the guys at the offensive coordinator position that we're looking at. Really quickly, we'll just talk about the transfers just to update you guys on the guys that have entered the transfer portal. It started with way back in September with a couple of guys that entered the transfer portal, and it has continued through December 8th. When was that was the last time that you had somebody that entered the transfer portal. Isaiah Johnson, the wide receiver in the portal. Trevion Green, the offensive lineman. Wide receiver Paul Billups. He officially made it known that he is in the portal. He is not medically retiring, as there were some thoughts that was the way that he was going to go with his college career. You've got Yasser Smith, the tight end, that I think will probably end up converting back to the defensive line wherever he goes. William Boone, the offensive lineman, he made that official right before some of the other guys started officially entering the transfer portal. And then these are the guys that have entered since the season has concluded. Wide receiver Chris Culliver, wide receiver Jason Robinson, linebacker Kamori House, defensive back Ty White, offensive lineman Johnny Norwood, wide receiver Javarius Green, defensive back Khalil Conley, quarterback Max Johnson, offensive lineman Miles McVay, running back Davian Goss, and tight end Jake Johnson. You hear this list. Where does your attention turn to in terms of the most significant names that have entered? And are there any that you feel like are, I'm not going to say devastating blows, but significant blows to Carolina?
I mean, the most significant one is obviously Kamori House because was a starter, I think, second on the team in tackles, I think, this year. That's really the only one that stands out where you really raise an eyebrow. But I look at the way he played the last three games, and it wouldn't surprise me if he wanted to leave as much as Carolina wanted him to move on. Because those last three games were bad. I thought the effort was bad. I thought he got bullied, pushed around. There's the stuff about him off the field where looks like he had a hard time, driving the speed limit. It appears. So you have, that off the field distraction. So that's really the only name so far that has stood out because, Davian Goss, I mean, I can't even be mad at him. Like, you come back for what reason? You were underutilized. You weren't used the right way. And so I'm frustrated for him individually that he didn't get to have the type of year that we talked about him having in the preseason. But I understand why he's going in the production. There's not enough production there for me to be ultimately mad about because everything we talked about was projecting him to be, a better player than what we saw on the field. So right now, there hasn't, outside of the Kamori House and I guess the Davian Goss, there hasn't been one that really stands out, that really hurts Carolina in a major way. Got a long way to go with this thing, though. So there could be another. I would expect there's going to be at least another round or two of transfers that would exit the program, but nothing that there hasn't been a player that's transferred that we've had to dedicate an entire episode to, and I do think that's kind of surprising because I think after the way the season started, the way the season ended, maybe that would have happened, and maybe that'll happen here sometime soon, but that hasn't happened so far, and I kind of thought that we would have had to come on here and dedicate 25, 30 minutes to one individual guy, and that hasn't been the case so far.
Yeah, we're not giving 25 to 30 minutes on Kamori House. When he entered, I did a edition of the podcast that night talking about everybody that had entered, and he was the most significant of the group. Kamori House didn't want to be here. The last month of the season, based on what some of the reports were saying, I'm forgetting the last name of the reporter over there at Sports Illustrated, a guy that does a great job covering Carolina athletics for them. He said, this was something that was expected for the last month. Jacob Turner, when he saw the news, quoted it and said, "This is not a surprise." He knew that he was out the door. He had a foot out the door the last month of the season, and the final 3 games really showed you that. So to him, for him, it's honestly good riddance. Like if you're not going to play for this staff, and you were a guy that was recruited here by this staff, then what is the point of you sticking around? That's one that, yes, it might seem devastating on the surface, but if you simply aren't going to play with the effort that needs to be played with, well, then it is what it is. You got to move on and find guys that are actually going to give a damn when they're out there on the field. And knowing that he was a guy, if it's true that he was a guy that, the last month of the year was checked out, really makes you wonder why he was playing as much as he was. You should have played Mekhi Bayer over him. I don't care that Kamori House is a better coverage guy. If you say that you are out the door, you are looking to enter the transfer portal at the end of the season, well, then there's no need for you to play. We're going to find other guys on this roster that are going to play significant minutes for us next year, and we're just going to go from there. But I think Carolina thought that he would at least give them the effort, that he would at least be trying to put something on tape for whatever school he eventually ends up at. Doesn't seem like that's necessarily the case. And so for him, that's one that I guess isn't that shocking. And really, I don't think is that significant of a blow for Carolina if he wasn't going to give the effort. Big one to me is Goss. Because when I look at it, and you could say, well, he was the third running back in this rotation. First of all, you guys know my feelings on them running Benjamin Hall. I don't think that Benjamin Hall brings to the table what Davian Goss brings to the table. I think Davian Goss has a chance to be a really special back at this level, and I think he's going to land somewhere. Someone told me that the early favorite is South Florida. I think that'd be a great fit for him, especially if they're somehow able to keep Byron Brown. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen. He probably will go with his head coach, Alex Galesh, to Auburn. But, if he slides into an offense that gets a quarterback, he could be the next Marlon Mack. I really believe that he is that good. I think what you saw from him in flashes in his freshman year, and then what you saw from him at times this year, is very translatable to him having a successful career. This one's on the staff. I think they did a horrible job managing this running back rotation. I think Davian Goss, out of the guys in that backfield, I think he was your best running back, your most consistent running back. I think Damon June is a guy that has the most potential, but I really do believe that Davian Goss was a guy that this staff should have realized what they had in him. They did not. And now it ultimately leads to you losing him in the transfer portal. So that one hurts. That one, I'm not saying I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in the staff. I'm not disappointed in him for entering. I get it 100%, but I'm disappointed in the staff for not using him the way that they should have. And then the other one that shocked me a little was Miles McVay. I thought, especially with all the guys that are leaving along this offensive line, that's a guy that played a little bit at the end of the year. I actually thought he was better than Jordan Hall was at left tackle. Not saying he was perfect, but I think he's a guy that you would expect would get better in the system if he was here for another year. He ends up entering the portal, so more depth at the offensive line that ends up leaving. And so, that's certainly something that Carolina is going to have to replace in the portal. But as you said, I would expect at least one more round of entries into the transfer portal. I think that is certainly something that makes a lot of sense. With, the portal opening on January 2nd, you feel like as guys, continue to mold their futures, there probably are some guys on the roster that are waiting for some of these other schools that are going to eventually contact them, and then they'll end up making their decision. We just hope that we don't see a big name enter the transfer portal. Hopefully Carolina can hold on to all these guys. If there is a big name that enters, you know where to find all that information. That'll be on the website at heeltoughblog.com. We had you covered earlier today with the firings of Freddie Kitchens and Mike Priefer. So make sure you go and read that article on the website. I'm gonna type up an article for you guys sometime tomorrow. It'll be out where I'll tell you who my favorites are at that offensive coordinator spot. It'll involve a lot of those names that you see there, if not all of the names that you see there in terms of the group that I will pick from. But I'll give you the top 3 guys that I think Carolina should go after to replace Freddie Kitchens as their offensive coordinator this upcoming season. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. And then again, any other news that comes out on the transfer side of things, we will have you covered. Of course, we'll have you covered on some of the guys that Carolina is going after in the transfer portal when some of those start rolling in as well. So make sure that you're keeping tabs on the website. Same thing for the basketball side of things. Game against USC Upstate coming up tomorrow. So make sure that you guys are over there on the website checking out the preview for that in the morning. And then the recap will be up sometime after the game. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow or if it'll be on Sunday, but either way, make sure that you guys are checking all of that stuff out. And the way to know that is to go over to social media. Follow us on Twitter at Heel Tough Blog. Make sure you turn on those post notifications so that whenever we put up a new piece of content, you guys will be notified. That's the best way to do it because, again, I've said it so many times, and I continue to say it. We do not put anything else on that page. Our personal pages, we can't promise you anything. We're going to rant about the Mets. We're going to put stuff up there about our other favorite teams, Carolina Panthers, and if you're on Josh's page. But when you go to the Heel Tough blog page, that is strictly our content that goes on there. So make sure that you guys are over there following that Twitter page. Go over to the Facebook page, give us a like as well. And one of the other important things we keep telling you guys, and we got some great viewers on there tonight, on YouTube. Go over to that YouTube page, hit subscribe on the YouTube page for us, and make sure you watch the podcast over there. That would be great if you guys could do that. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.